once we've got the man wandering around in the garden, we get the creation of woman. Okay, so first, a language note, and one of my favorite little sort of language trivia bits in the entire Bible, and a wonderful example of just how dependent we modern English speakers are on the King James version. So uh, the translation I have here, as I use regularly, is the Jewish publication one, but many of us may be used to the King James language here, which I will now add. Right, not a fitting helper for him, but the King James reads, "A help meet for him." This slightly weird phrase in the King James Bible became the English word helpmeet, like one word, right? I will make a helpmeet for him, right? Uh, a word which I don't think anybody really fully understood, which is why that word became more reasonably uh, the word helpmate, right? Which I think is still like reasonably a common word, at least common enough that it doesn't strike the ear as super weird, right? She became a helpmate for him, right? I can understand that, right? A mate and a helpmate, right? It's definitely better than helpmeet, but it's still kind of weird. So what is happening here? Uh, this all happened because English, I guess not particularly long after the King James, lost the use of the word meet that the King James is using here, which is the word meet meaning fitting. Shakespeare uses it the same way. Right? So the King James is translating it basically correctly. A help fitting for him. And instead of fitting, they used their word meet, a help meet for him. Right? So perfectly correct translation of the Hebrew, actually. But once we lost the meaning of meet, we ended up with the word helpmate, which never actually existed, right? Which is, again, just a reminder that our English is so heavily influenced by the King James that we end up with words like helpmate that are derived from misunderstandings of what was, at the time, a totally plausible, reasonable translation. Okay, uh, so now that we've decided to find a helpmeet for him, here come the animals. Uh, Now, this isn't what we read in Genesis 1, where all the birds are made on day 5 and all the animals are made on day 6, and all of them before humans. Here, all the animals are made at once, all still theoretically on day 1, and all after our one human was created. And you'll notice, by the way, that the animals are also made out of the earth, right? From the Adamah, using that same sort of potter artisanal term, right? God is, again, still like forming these living beings. Um, and I also want to notice why, according to this story, why do animals exist in the world at all? And I mentioned this a little bit last time. In Genesis 1, animals pre-exist humans. They're blessed before humans are blessed, right? They have their own independent sort of being in the world. In Genesis 2, animals exist only for the sake of humanity, right? And only because, right, Adam might have been lonely and, had to produce a whole bunch of animals to see what would work, and nothing did. And we'll come back to that next week as a important little bit. Okay, third, what's actually happening here with how the woman is made? So, rib is the common translation. The Hebrew doesn't technically say rib, though I'm not sure that I know what the biblical Hebrew word for rib would be. The term that's used is a little bit more abstract than that. Sometimes it's used for like a building beam. I think rib is still pretty likely, all things considered. But there's been lots of interesting debate over the years about exactly what's going on here. It's been argued that why did they say that it's taken from she's made from the rib? Well, maybe it has something to do with different rib cage structures of men and women. And it's an explanation for that. Maybe the most outrageous theory that's like currently out there. Apologies in advance. The most outrageous theory is that what this is meant to describe is the penis bone, which humans don't have, but basically every other animal does, right? Every other mammal does. Um, and so this was supposed to be the explanation. Why do humans not have that particular bone? Well, because this is how woman was made. That is like a peer-reviewed, published, argument out there in the world, which may just say something about standards of peer review. Um, Actually, it's a perfectly fine argument. In any case, in both cases, what's being understood is that this rib bit is an etiology, right? It's an explanation for why things are the way they are. Why does man not have a certain bone? Why does the rib cage structure different between men and women? Uh, I don't think that's what's going on here at all. I might be wrong, but I don't read this as an attempt to explain something in our present. I think it's an attempt to explain something in the past that was otherwise kind of not explainable. If I have two animals, I know where the third animal comes from. If I have one human originally, how did we ever get a second human? Right? What's what's the like what's the theoretical logic? How could they possibly be explaining this to themselves? Right? It can't be through any of the mechanisms that animals reproduce because there's only one, and I know we need more than one. But they did know how to create one plant from one pre-existing plant, and we do too. Right? We call it just taking a cutting. Right? You take a little bit of the stem or the right you clip a little off the side of a plant and you plant it. And what you end up with is another of the same species of plant. And we may know that those two plants are genetically identical, but they didn't know what genetics were, so they didn't think that. But I sort of suspect that that's the image that's going on here in the author's mind. Is essentially God is taking a cutting from Adam and creating Eve from it. And I think this fits well with sort of the broader agricultural imagery of this creation story. And so it's not really an etiology. How did something in our present happen? It's sort of just logic. How did we go from one to two? And they had a mechanism for it. It just wasn't a human mechanism. It was a plant mechanism. That's my minor theory.